Misinformation about carbohydrates has been rampant in the media for decades. I would say that we're still constantly exposed to messages that carbs are bad, they're fattening, and sometimes they're toxic or they're poison. These claims, they're false and they exist only to use fear mongering as a tactic to sell something, usually. I would also say that just from an algorithm standpoint, sound evidence-based nutrition advice just doesn't get picked up the same way in algorithms. Or if we're talking about, news outlets, they're there to sell clicks. They're not there to sell evidence-based nutrition information. And I hate to say that, but that's just how our media environment works. It's to sell a narrative.
Welcome back, everybody. There seems to be a lot of confusion around carbs, what they do, how to use them, when to use them. To discuss this in more detail, I brought back on Eden Morris. Eden is a registered dietitian. She's also a certified intuitive eating counselor. She works with both athletes and active adults. I hope you enjoy our conversation about carbohydrates. Eden, thanks again for being here.
Yeah, excited to be here and talk about my favorite macronutrient.
I feel like everyone likes carbs. I feel like, unfortunately, it's seen as a guilty pleasure. Everyone's saying, oh, I don't know if I should do this. But I feel like today we'll get into why that shouldn't be the case, especially if you're training a lot. But to start off, what do most people misunderstand about carbohydrates?
Well, before I even answer that question, I have to just address the guilty pleasure thing with
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
When somebody says they feel guilty around anything they're eating, I'm like, did you commit a crime or did you steal money to commit a crime? Right? If not, eating is a basic human need. There is never a reason to feel guilty. And if somebody does feel guilty, it's just usually a sign to me that we have some deeper work to do on their relationship with food to help them feel safe around food. But then to go answer your other question, what do people misunderstand about carbohydrates? One, they are the body's main fuel source. For the brain, for the working muscles, that's what the body wants to use for energy first. There are different kinds of carbohydrates, and fiber comes from carbohydrates. And I'm saying that because a dietitian that I love, Dr. Jessica Nurek, she was on another podcast and she said something about this, and people were like, "What?" And it was there's only 3 macronutrients: carbs, protein, and fat. And carbs contain fiber. People were like, what? And I just thought it was really interesting. But carbohydrates are the body's main fuel source, like I said, and they're more readily converted into glucose than protein or fats. They're an essential fuel source for our muscles and central nervous system and brain. And the quickest way to negatively impact your performance outside of dehydration is to not eat enough overall carbohydrates on a daily basis. Another thing too, when I talk about it's the body's main fuel source, the percentage of how much you should be eating on a daily basis for active people can range between 45 to 65% of our intake. And I think what confuses people about that is I'm not just saying sugar. I'm saying whole grains, fruits, vegetables, dairy, beans, legumes, and yes, also more simple carbohydrates to fuel activity. So when I say carbs, that's a broad category, not just straight sugar.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot in that with carbs. It's not just a certain type of bread, or there's a lot within it that we'll get into for today. But yeah, to go back on your first point, you're right. It's a language or an expression that's very common in fitness, and I think a lot in fitness spaces and outside of fitness spaces, this feeling of or perceived guilt. And it's something that definitely goes unaddressed in a lot of places, unfortunately, but I appreciate you bringing that up. So to get more into carbs, it sounds like the restriction of carbs, pulling them out, has been shown to reduce performance, whether it's sport performance, and you brought up cognitive health as well. The brain runs on glucose. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. What's interesting is a lot of times when somebody doesn't think they're under eating, I will list to them the signs of low carbohydrate intake, and it's brain fog, feeling faint, feeling irritable, depression, these mood changes. And they're like, oh, wait, that's me. Or even I was talking to a client earlier today who has had some subtle restrictions sneak back in. And she's like, yeah, I've noticed I have more cravings for sweet things at night. And I'm like, that's your brain telling you it didn't get enough of its main fuel source throughout the day. Even though this person's eating consistently, eating 3 meals, eating snacks, there's a slight restriction on the carbohydrates, and it's showing up in. She also said she felt faint at one point during the day. And then again, craving more sweets at night. But I just find it's interesting too that when people start to increase their carbohydrate intake to match training demand or just to increase life quality, they tend to feel less depressed over time and they have more joy and they have more space in their brain to think about other things. But it's tricky to get people to have that buy-in. But another thing about taking in enough overall carbohydrates too, like we are living in such a time where there's such a protein craze. But if you don't take in enough adequate carbohydrates, you don't utilize protein effectively. So adequate carbohydrate intake has this protein sparing effect, meaning that eating enough carbohydrates protects muscle tissues from breaking down to be used as energy. You don't want your muscle tissue to be broken down as energy. So, any protein that a person does consume, if they're eating adequate carbohydrates as well, will be used for its primary purpose, which is muscle growth and maintenance, rather than being redirected to perform the function of carbohydrates.
Right. So from my understanding, when I've worked with other dietitians in the past, the way they first, before I got into working as a coach, explained carbs to me was for that reason, that we're sparing the protein that
Hmm.
you're taking in. And that was the first time I worked with a sports dietitian. I was trying to see if there were small things I could adjust. And that was one of the things he brought up. Hey, when you're finishing a workout, have you thought about pairing your shake with a banana?
Hmm.
And I was thinking, that seems kind of
What?
pointless. Why? Yeah. And so he goes, yeah, this is exactly what you're talking about. We're trying to spare that protein. And I had a conversation with somebody this week asking about, well, if I want to make my body more efficient, why don't I just use protein? And that goes more into metabolism and the fuel sources that the body can use. So with protein, it's less efficient. Your body can use it, right? But it's,
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, it's not as
Correct.
easy for it to break down.
Yeah, it has to go through more metabolic processes to make it more usable to be created for energy. I don't want to get too in the weeds with that, but in general, it's like you don't necessarily want protein to be used for that. But again, like even if you're just eating more protein than carbs too, like there is going to be a cost on your muscles as well.
In terms of there
Like
isn't as much
with muscle
glycogen in the
breakdown, like
muscle.
with muscle
Yeah,
breakdown, that can lead to like it sounds weird, but more ammonia in the
right,
bloodstream that has to be deaminated from the liver and the kidneys. So you're just overloading your system versus if you were eating just enough of all of the macronutrients, it helps the body perform more efficiently.
right. And so that ties into, I'm guessing, the amount of glycogen that your muscles can store. And if there isn't that storage there, and we're also talking about the liver, then that's where your
Hmm.
body goes, cool, we got to figure this out. We're going to
Right.
find somewhere to pull it from. And that's where protein comes into the equation. Or am I off on that?
No, you're right. Yeah. And then like again, that can be dietary protein and a combination of muscle protein breakdown as well.
Okay. So less efficient. So
Mhm.
with carbs, big picture, why do you think they've been so demonized?
This is a really good question. I had to think about it. I was like, where does this come from? I mean, I can speak from it like personally, like some
Sure.
of it gets passed down from family members. Like I learned some food rules from women in my family or honestly, women's magazines growing up. I don't know if people remember like but when Women's Health at a time used to have like charts of like do X amount of lunges to burn off X amount of M&Ms or whatever else around like Halloween. They don't do that stuff anymore as far as I know, but I also don't read those women's magazines anymore from a protective place for myself. But misinformation about carbohydrates has been rampant in the media for decades. I would say that we're still constantly exposed to messages that carbs are bad, they're fattening, and sometimes they're toxic or they're poison. And I would say like anything in excess can be toxic or poisonous to the body. So that just drives me nuts. But these claims, they're false and they exist only to use fear mongering as a tactic to sell something, usually. Um, I would also say that just from an algorithm standpoint, sound evidence based nutrition advice just doesn't get picked up the same way in algorithms. Or if we're talking about, news outlets, they're there to sell clicks, they're not there to sell evidence-based nutrition information. And I hate to say that, but like that's just how our media environment works. It's to sell a narrative. I I guess I would also say that registered dietitians, we hear this like, oh, when I eat less carbs, I lose weight. This is true, but it's temporary. So when you limit or don't eat enough carbs, you will lose weight, but the results usually don't last without repercussions, which can be decreased training response, sleep disturbances, mood changes. But like when you limit carbohydrates, you will burn quickly through the stored form of carbohydrates called glycogen in your liver and your muscles. So, especially if you're really active. So you might lose 5 to 10 pounds fairly quickly, but that's just short-term evidence that whatever diet, quote unquote, worked, and carbs must be causing this person to gain weight. But that weight is quickly regained when somebody starts eating carbohydrates again. But in reality, that fluctuation is most likely water weight because when carbohydrates are stored as glycogen, they're stored with water as well.
So it's very short term a lot of times when people look at it. And from the research I've looked at where they compare this stuff, research for I'm not in the nutrition research world, but I will look at research sometimes just to go through it. And I learned about research a little bit with my degree. And my takeaways were always with nutrition, research is very, very hard to do. And a
It is
lot of
hard.
these studies, because it's so hard to control these things, it's very short term. So yes, someone might cut certain things out and lose weight, but that's not it's not sustainable a lot of
Hmm.
times. And it's often, like you said, when you describe the side effects, it's pretty miserable. So
Hmm.
there's a trade-off there, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, and with any kind of, I would say, like research that's studying weight loss, there's very few long-term studies showing that it's sustainable when somebody's doing something that is, frankly, like a fad or an extreme, extremely low-calorie diet. Like it's just the success rate is low. Weight cycling is a thing for a reason. Like, I mean, the human body wants to protect itself when it's not getting enough overall energy, and that's diving deeper into metabolic adaptation for sure, right? Where people are like, well, why do I stop losing weight when I'm cutting calories? I mean, again, after a while, the body wants to protect itself and it wants to store energy when it gets the limited energy that you're giving it. And when you do start to eat again, it doesn't know if it can trust you. So you might gain weight initially, but I see this with clients who are working on eating disorder recovery. There might be a state where they're hypermetabolic at first, but once they get to a normal eating pattern to where they're eating 3 meals a day plus snacks, their body composition evens out more. But I always have to be like, you got to trust me. I swear this will even out. But like again, if they've been limiting carbs and overall calories for a long time, they could experience some short-term weight gain, but then it redistributes once the body trusts that it's going to have consistent energy intake.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it sounds like the body really there was a reason that human beings have survived this long. It's because the body will do things whether you're consciously aware of it or not to
Hmm.
get you through whatever situation it is, and including if it has to force you to slow down or it'll adapt to keep you going when resources are scarce.
Yeah, I feel like in our society, though, we're really good at ignoring the signs and symptoms of our body, but we also want to rely on external data to tell us how our body is doing. And this might shock people, but I can't remember if I've said this in a previous episode, but I wear nothing. I track nothing. And they're like, how do you know what you're doing? And I'm like, I really do trust that, like, oh, I'm getting 30 grams of carbs for my workout. How did I feel during my workout? Oh, I see my weight's going up. I can feel the progressive overload. And then I follow those performance plates that I know you and I've talked about, where it's like, I just kind of know now. I don't need something external, but it took years of the rebuilding trust with my body to be able to do that. But I was thinking about that too from this form of data. I do think that this kind of exacerbates the carbohydrate fear as well. And I was looking in one of my resources next to me, Sick Enough by Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani. It's more of an eating disorder book, but she also just echoes what I said, where research identifies that athletes' carbohydrate fear emerges from external pressures from coaches, social media, and body composition evaluations that are used to injudiciously and, excuse me, like when people use body composition techniques too often, then it can lead to more fears and focus on weight gain and body image in athletes versus overall performance and how somebody feels in their body. So if you notice these little fluctuations, you're more likely to blame what you're eating, the carbohydrates, etc.
So you fixate on it more, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, with carbs, there's two last points I want to get into before we run out of time. So we don't have a ton of time to get into them with carbs, but one of them I wanted to focus on. You mentioned the book we talked about last time, Nutrient Timing, and the recommendations there, the 4-3-2-1 principle. Can we talk about that a little bit before?
Yeah, I find this one to be interesting. And I guess I would say the way that I simplify this is like if I wake up before a workout and it depends on how much time I have, but that's usually around how much carbohydrates I'll take in. But you can fine tune a little bit more to where you have like 1 gram per kilogram an hour before your workout. Like, that's how many carbohydrates you should take in. If you have 2 hours before your workout, you take in 2 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of your body weight. If you have 3 hours, then that's 3 grams per kilogram of your body weight. So basically, that dictates, am I eating a full meal, or am I eating a balanced snack, or am I eating a snack that's purely simple carbohydrates?
And with simple versus complex, we're simple carbs, we're talking about carbs that are much faster to break down for the body to absorb. So things like white bread or a
Mhm.
banana or some other examples you've
Juice,
listed. Yeah,
yeah,
juice. Yeah, you said that was one of
applesauce.
your favorites. I remember hearing you on a
Yeah.
podcast talk about it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites because when I was a college athlete, I was really afraid of liquid carbs or like liquid calories. You hear this rule in diet culture like don't drink your calories, and I think one of the ways I started to really face these food fears was one, and obviously during endurance sports, taking in a lot of these foods or liquids, but before activities, like, you know what? I never bought apple juice or orange juice in college, but if I only have like 30 minutes and I need 30 grams of carbs fast, 8 ounces of orange juice hits the spot and I'm out the door.
Yeah, and it's not heavy on the stomach and you're ready to rock.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's the most common fear I've seen from people I've worked with is especially if they're about to go run is I don't want to have an upset stomach. And you've discussed this in a lot of your articles. Other dietitians I've worked with have done the same about if you're training for a race, prep with what you think will be a good fit for you, test it out, the amounts you're going to use. That way, you know before race day if it works. But there are different things you can try. So if one thing doesn't work, don't throw everything out, but try something else. Is there anything I'm missing in there?
No, it's definitely experiment and train your gut with what is familiar and then don't try anything new on race day, you know?
Yeah. Or a
But I
super,
mean,
super heavy fiber.
you're right. And I just, when it comes to whether it's eating breakfast or having a workout, or sorry, having a snack before your workout early in the morning, I don't really feel like there's an excuse. Like you can always take in something liquid or semi-liquid, whether you have again 15 minutes or 45 minutes. You're just going to get more out of your workout. You're going to top off the stored glycogen in your liver that honestly your body burns through while you're sleeping. So if you want to have a good run or a good workout, it's not going to hurt you to take in a little bit of carbohydrate before you go ask your body to perform.
Nice. Yeah, I've heard some people debate that where they say, "Oh, but if you had dinner last night, you're fine." But I always feel like that could be case by case. Is that fair
Yeah,
to
I was like,
say?
sure, but I've had more evidence in my body that I can crush the end of my workout. So right now, I like my strength training workouts are in the morning, and yeah, the first part of it is like more strength and mobility, but the end is conditioning. If I go into that depleted from the night before, it's just perceived effort is going to be higher at the end. Can I do it? Sure, but do I want to feel better and get more out of it? Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Just hitting that wall, you notice. It's a you're like you. I hear people say, "Oh, I lack discipline," and I go, "I don't think so. I don't know many people that lack discipline that are still functioning adults, especially working professionals that are just
Mhm.
doing things as much as they can. Not to put anything else outside of that, but yeah, I hear lack of discipline, and I immediately go, I doubt it. I feel like there are other things at play here that we could use to help you feel better and be able to train at the level you want to. But Eden, I don't want to take any more of your time. Where can people find out more about you if they'd like to look at more of your articles or you have a few ebooks as well?
Mhm. You can always go to my website. It's tetonperformancenutrition.com. You can send me an email at eden at doc eden at tetonperformancenutrition.com, or you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at gardenofeden_RD. I also have my own podcast where I talk a little bit, honestly, more from like the eating disorder perspective in athletes, but it's called Pocket Snacks with Eden Morris.
It's a great podcast for anyone that hasn't checked it out. Pocket Snacks. It is, yeah, fantastic, worth listening, especially if you're interested in more nutrition stuff, as well as any coaches out there listening to this. I highly recommend checking it out. But Eden, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Colin.